I never thought a simple, "good morning," could hurt this much. For most of my life, I believed in community. Neighbors greeting each other, small acts of kindness, the comfort of knowing you belong somewhere. At 55, I was finally ready to start over. I had saved enough to buy a little house on a quiet street, with a porch where I dreamed of reading books and a garden I could finally call my own. Moving day felt like a fresh beginning. As I unpacked boxes and watered the front flowers, I imagined knocking on doors, meeting new friends, and maybe even baking a pie to share. That's the kind of woman I am, always trying to open doors with warmth. But almost from the start, I felt something unsettling. When I waved to the couple across the street, their smiles froze and quickly vanished. When I said hello to a group of kids playing nearby, their mother rushed to pull them inside. It wasn't just awkwardness. It was cold, calculated, deliberate. At first, I told myself I was imagining things. Maybe people here were just private. But weeks passed and the silence around me grew heavier. They laughed and chatted freely with others on the block. But with me, doors closed, curtains drawn, eyes that avoided mine. The final straw came when another family moved in just a few houses away. They were white, cheerful, and instantly welcomed with flowers, casseroles, and invitations to backyard barbecues. I watched from my porch, holding a cake I had baked, realizing no one had ever come to my door. That evening, I decided I couldn't keep pretending. I needed to know. So the next afternoon, I walked up to my closest neighbor, who was trimming his hedges. My heart pounded as I forced a smile. "Excuse me," I said softly. "Can I ask you something?" He looked up, his eyes cold, his hands tightening on the shears. "I've tried to greet you all so many times," I continued, "but no one ever answers me. May I ask why?" His answer was sharp, merciless, and left no room for doubt. "Because people like you don't belong here." For a moment, my body froze. My throat closed as though the words had stolen my breath. It wasn't just rejection. It was exile. A declaration that I was an outsider in the very place I had chosen to call home. And yet, beneath the shock, something began to burn inside me. Anger. A question I could not leave unanswered. What exactly did he mean by people like you? I didn't sleep that night. His sentence kept echoing in my ribs like a knock no one intended to answer. People like you. I turned the words around in my head until they grew edges. By dawn, I made coffee, opened my notebook, and wrote one question on the first page. How far does this go? I started small. I waved again at the couple across the street as they loaded groceries. The husband pretended to check his watch. The wife slipped into the passenger seat without looking up. A dog walker paused near my lawn, and then, without stepping closer, let the dog relieve itself right by my mailbox. When I stepped outside with a bag to clear it, he muttered, "Shouldn't leave trash out," and hurried away, leash taut like a warning. By noon, a white envelope appeared on my porch. No stamp, no name. Inside, a single sheet. Please follow community guidelines. Loud music after 7 p.m. is unacceptable. I don't even own a stereo. My TV barely whispers. I placed the note beside my coffee and felt my hands shake. Not with fear now, but with a clean, steady anger. I walked to the HOA board posted by the mailboxes. A sheet listed, reminders to all residents, trim hedges, approved paint colors, parking rules. Neatly taped beside it, in a different font, was another list. Recent concerns. Only one address was printed. Mine. Yard clutter, unfriendly demeanor, visitors at odd hours, lies stacked like bricks. On the way back, I saw Mrs. Dalton, the grandmother who passed me every afternoon with a cane and a perfect silver bun. She'd never spoken to me, but her eyes always lingered. I took a breath. "Good afternoon," I said, steady. "Can I ask, has there been talk about me?" She hesitated, fingers tightening around the handle of her cane. "People talk in any neighborhood," she said, trying to move past, but I matched her gentle pace. "I'm just trying to understand," I added. "If I've done something wrong, I want to fix it." Mrs. Dalton's gaze softened for a moment, like a draft slipping through a shut window. She leaned in just enough to whisper, "It's not what you've done. It's who you are to them." And then she kept walking, faster than I'd ever seen her move. I stood there, the afternoon sun hot on my face, watching her disappear. It's who you are. So it wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't me failing to introduce myself properly. It wasn't my hedge or my porch light or the color of my front door. It was me. My skin, my age, my presence in a place that had already decided the shape of its welcome mats. That evening, I put a camera above the door. Not because I was afraid, at least that's what I told myself, but because I wanted the truth recorded when it came to my porch again. I organized my receipts, my utility bills, every HOA email in a neat folder, labeling everything with dates. I have learned over a lifetime that when people don't plan to listen to you, you bring proof that refuses to be silenced. Around 9, the porch light flickered. I opened the door to a second envelope, this one smaller. I looked left and right. No footsteps, no voices. Only a lawn sprinkler ticking like a metronome in the dark. Inside there was no letter, just a photo. It was my house. In the picture, a red circle was drawn around my front window. And in the corner, scrawled in block letters, "Watch yourself." I stared at it, pulse roaring in my ears, and then felt something else rise, a steadiness. I turned the photo over. On the back, in faint pencil, there was a date and time from 2 nights ago. The exact hour I'd been sitting by that window, reading under a lamp. Someone wasn't just rejecting me. Someone was watching me. I set the photo on the table, reached for my phone, and hovered over the call button. Police? The HOA? A friend? Then the doorbell rang, once, twice, sharp as a slap in the quiet house. I checked the camera feed. The screen showed nothing but my doormat and the slow sweep of my porch light. Who rings a bell and leaves no shadow? The silence after the bell was heavier than thunder. I stood frozen in my hallway, phone still in hand, watching the grainy live feed on the camera. The porch looked empty, but I swear I could feel eyes pressing against the glass. I counted to 10, waiting for a figure to appear, for footsteps to echo down the driveway. Nothing. Only the steady hum of the street lamp outside. I forced myself to open the door. My breath puffed white in the cool night air, though my palms were damp. On the doormat lay a stone, smooth and heavy, with another folded note beneath it. I bent down, heart hammering, and pulled it free. In jagged handwriting, it read, "Leave before it gets worse." I shut the door fast, locking both bolts. My fingers trembled as I pressed the paper flat on the kitchen table beside the earlier photo. The message was clear now. This wasn't passive silence anymore. This was escalation. I picked up the phone again, this time determined to dial the police. But then my mind replayed all the headlines I'd read, the way black women's fears are often dismissed as exaggeration. I pictured an officer shrugging, calling it a prank or worse, turning the questions back on me. So instead I called the only person I trusted enough, my sister, Yvonne. When she answered, her voice was warm. But when I told her everything, the notes, The stone, the bell. Her tone hardened. "Don't you dare brush this off," she said. "This is targeted. You need to protect yourself." Her words gave me strength, but also a chilling confirmation. This wasn't in my head. Someone out there wanted me gone. The next morning, I decided to confront the HOA directly. Maybe if I brought the evidence, someone would be forced to act. I walked into the community office clutching the envelope and the photo. The receptionist, a young man with glasses, barely glanced at me before saying, "Appointments only." I laid the photo on the counter. "Then make one, because this isn't just a complaint. It's a threat." His eyes flicked to the picture, and for the first time he looked uneasy. He disappeared into a back room and returned with Mr. Carlyle, the HOA president, a tall, stern man who greeted me without a smile. I explained everything, showed him the proof. He listened in silence, then pushed the photo back across the counter. "Are you sure you didn't misinterpret?" he asked. "Sometimes people feel out of place and imagine hostility." My stomach twisted. Even with the photo, even with the note, I was being told it might all be in my head. "I'm not imagining someone ringing my doorbell at night," I said, my voice sharp now. "And I'm not imagining this handwriting." Mr. Carlyle's face tightened. "We'll keep an eye on things," he said. The words were thin, like a curtain barely covering the truth. They weren't going to help me. As I left, I noticed something on the bulletin board near the exit. A new flyer, freshly pinned. It read, "Neighborhood Safety Meeting, discussing recent concerns." And at the bottom, in neat letters, my address was listed. They weren't going to help me. They were going to put me on trial. That night, I sat by the window with the porch light off, the photo still burning in my mind. At 11:43 p.m., the camera caught a figure, tall, hooded, pausing in front of my house. They didn't knock, didn't speak, just stood there, staring at the door, and then, slowly, they raised their hand and pointed directly at the camera. I told myself I would stay calm. I had to. Panic would make me do something rash and feed exactly the narrative they wanted, an overreacting woman making trouble. But calm doesn't mean helpless. I set the camera to record everything on motion detect, downloaded the last 2 nights' footage, and watched, frame by frame, until my eyes burned. The hooded figure returned, 3 nights in a row, always pausing under the streetlight, always pointing at the camera, like a conductor indicating a solo. Once the figure crouched and pressed something small into the dirt at the edge of my flower bed. On the footage, it looked like a glint. Metal, maybe. A key? A nail? I rewound, zoomed, enhanced as much as the cheap feed would allow. The object was too small to identify. Whoever left it knew how to avoid fingerprints and cameras. If it was coordinated, where did the coordination start? My mind kept returning to the HOA office, the receptionist's shrug, Mr. Carlyle's thin promise, the flyer with my address pinned like an accusation. I printed the footage and the notes, put them into a folder, and walked back to the community center. This time, with purpose. The meeting room was full that afternoon. Canned coffee steamed on a table, folding chairs circled like an audience waiting for a verdict. People murmured as I entered. Neighbors I'd passed in the street, heads turned toward me with expressions I couldn't read. Mr. Carlyle stood at a podium, clipboard in hand. He welcomed everyone, then launched into his agenda, landscaping, paint codes, and when he reached the recent concerns item, his tone changed. It became something else, a performance. "We've all noticed a change," he said, scanning the room. "There are new families, and there have been reports. We must maintain our standards. Our neighborhood has a character we want to protect." "Protect from what?" someone asked. "From elements that do not fit," Mr. Carlyle answered, and the room hummed as if a bell had been struck. I felt the air tighten. It wasn't about hedges or loud music anymore. It was about who belonged. I stepped forward. "Excuse me," I said, my voice small but steady. "My house. My address is listed on the flyer. I've had threatening notes, and someone has been watching me. I have evidence. A chorus of polite coughs cut me off. "We're all concerned," Mr. Carlyle said, but his eyes slid past me, landing on a woman 2 rows back. Her name tag read, Mrs. Dalton, the same silver-bunned grandmother who'd whispered to me in the street. "Mrs. Dalton," he asked, "do you have something to add?" She cleared her throat and, in a voice that rattled like china, told the room that change could be unsettling. "We want safety," she said. "We want harmony." And Dasan, another neighbor, Tommy, the dog walker from earlier, leaned in and said, "Someone needs to remind newcomers of our expectations." He smiled, and when he did, I realized I'd seen that grin the day my mailbox was dirtied. My folder felt heavy in my hands. I realized then that this wasn't just passive prejudice. It was being organized, nodded at in public, sanctioned in whispers. People were choosing sides. I held up my printouts. "This is harassment," I said. "It's illegal. I want the board to act." Mr. Carlyle's jaw tightened. "We'll form a committee to review—" "To review?" I interrupted. "I'm on camera. My porch was circled in a photo. Someone left a note that says, 'Leave before it gets worse.' What do you mean by review?" Silence swelled. Then a voice, low and calm, came from the back of the room. It was a voice I recognized now. The same cadence as the man who'd pretended to check his watch the first week I arrived. He said, "Sometimes the best way to protect a neighborhood is to nudge people toward decisions they'd already make if they were sensible." The room shifted. Faces softened into approval. I felt something cold slip under my skin. My fingers tightened around the folder. Who said that?" I asked. No one moved to answer. Then suddenly, Mr. Carlyle tapped the microphone and smiled a practiced smile. "We'll handle it discreetly," he said. "No need for alarm." Handle it discreetly. I left the meeting with my heart pounding. As I walked home, the taste of copper in my mouth, I noticed a glint near the curb where someone had parked earlier. A small metal badge, half buried in gravel, an HOA pin, the same emblem I'd seen on the notice board. I picked it up with gloved fingers. On the back, stamped faintly, was a name. And it was one I had not expected to find in this town. Whoever owned that pin was someone I'd waved to on my very first day. Someone who had smiled and nodded as I carried boxes across my new lawn. I stood there, on the sidewalk, holding the pin, and understood that the enemy was closer than I thought. Who had I been trusting all along? I turned the pin over in my palm as if it might whisper an apology. The name stamped on the back was E. Harris. My memory snagged. Eileen Harris, tall, polite, the woman who'd brought over a casserole the first week I moved in. She'd smiled as I wiped sweat from my brow, patted my hand and said, "Welcome to the neighborhood." Her smile now felt like a camera flash in the dark, bright, staged, and suddenly suspect. I walked to her house because the front walk felt like a set of footprints I needed to follow. Her porch was tidy, wine chimes chiming with the afternoon breeze. Eileen opened the door before I even reached it, wearing a cardigan buttoned to the throat, and that same careful smile. "Hello," she said, as if greeting a neighbor. Can I help you? My voice was steady, though my pulse sprinted. Eileen, do you work with the HOA? Do you know about the flyers and the notes left on my porch? Her expression flickered. Not guilt exactly, but a practiced moment of concern. Oh my, she said. I was so worried when I heard someone had been frightened. I don't know anything about notes, dear. You should tell the board. I lifted the pin. Then how did this pin end up near my curb? It has your name on the back. Eileen's hand went to her chest like an actress sensing the cue. I had one once, she said, vague. We all have those pins. People lose things. She said it like a rehearsed line. In the distance, kids laughed, unbothered. A man across the street washed his car, humming. It should have felt ordinary. Instead, everything felt like a stage set that had suddenly been turned on me. I walked away, but the pin burned in my pocket. I wasn't naive enough to expect an admission. People who commit harm rarely hand you the script. They prefer to keep their hands clean and their smiles ready. Back at my house, I spread everything out on the kitchen table. The notes, the photo, the pin. I thought of Yvonne's voice telling me to protect myself. I called her, and we talked strategy. Move the camera to cover more angles. Document every interaction. And, this was her firmest instruction, find allies. She reminded me that fear dies when carried by more than one person. So I began to knock on doors. First, the White family who'd been welcomed to block barbecues. They greeted me with polite confusion and murmured sympathy, but little more. The dog walker scoffed, saying he'd never seen anything. And Mrs. Dalton? She avoided my eyes, clutching her cane. Even those I thought might help hesitated when the issue edged into accusation. But not everyone turned away. A young woman named Rosa, who ran the small flower shop 2 towns over but lived 3 streets over, left work early and arrived with a thermos of tea. I don't know what's happening, she said, sitting at my kitchen table. But no one should be scared in their own home. Rosa helped me post signs about Neighborhood Watch in plain view. Postcards stating I had video evidence and that I was reporting incidents. Maybe it was bold. Maybe it was reckless. But it felt like air after being underwater. That night, I fell asleep with the camera feed on my phone. At 2:12 a.m., a notification woke me. Motion detected. My heart leapt as I thumbed the screen. The image was grainy. A tall figure in a hood moving along the sidewalk. But what caught my eye was a second figure, smaller, slipping something into a mailbox across from my porch. I zoomed in until the pixels blurred. The object looked like a key. The smaller figure turned, and for a heartbeat, the porch light painted a face I knew. It was Mrs. Dalton. My hands went cold. Questions crashed into me. Why would she do this? Had she been coerced? Was she protecting someone? Or had she been part of the plan all along? I watched the feed again. The smaller figure bent, rose, and walked away with the slow, steady step of someone who had rehearsed escape. I set the phone down and felt the house tilt under me. If someone I had trusted, someone the neighborhood trusted, was involved. What did that mean for me? For my safety? The next morning, I decided to check the mailbox across the street. My breath left me when I reached in. The small item inside felt cold and real. A key tag with the HOA emblem. And there was a note, folded tight and tucked beneath it. I opened it with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The note read only 2 words. Move on. Who had written that? And who was ordering whom to leave? The words blurred as I read them again. Move on. 2 syllables, sharp as broken glass. I shoved the note into my coat pocket, scanned the street, and felt the air press heavy around me. Curtains twitched. A car door slammed in the distance. Somewhere a lawn sprinkler hissed like a snake. The neighborhood looked unchanged. Painted porches, trimmed hedges, manicured lawns. But nothing felt ordinary anymore. Every detail hummed with menace. Back inside, I spread the note and the key tag across my kitchen table beside the other evidence. The pile was growing. A grotesque scrapbook of hostility. Photos, notes, warnings. Proof that this wasn't paranoia. It was a campaign. I couldn't keep this to myself anymore. If I disappeared into silence, their plan would win. So I made copies of everything and drove them to Yvonne. My sister's eyes burned as she looked through the folder. "They're pushing you," she said, jaw tight. "They want you to pack up, leave quietly, make space for the story they've already written about you." "And if I don't?" I asked. She leaned closer. "Then they'll escalate." Her words echoed as I drove home. When I pulled into my driveway, something new caught my eye. Spray paint. Across my garage door, in dripping red letters. "Out." My throat tightened, but I forced myself to take photos from every angle. Document, document, document. That was my shield. Still, as I held the phone steady, I felt my chest constrict. This wasn't just whispers and flyers anymore. This was a public mark, a warning branded on my house for everyone to see. I called the police this time. I didn't care if they dismissed me. An officer arrived, a man with weary eyes and a notebook. He listened as I explained everything, showed him the folder. He sighed, scratched something down, and finally said, "Could be a prank. Teenagers." "Teenagers don't sit in meetings," I snapped. "Teenagers don't deliver HOA flyers with my address circled." His gaze shifted toward the garage, then back at me. "We'll file a report," he said, closing the notebook. "But unless you catch them in the act, there's not much else we can do." When he drove off, leaving me in the glow of his taillights, I felt smaller than I'd ever felt. They wanted me invisible. Even the law treated me like a shadow. That night, I scrubbed at the paint until my arms ached, but faint red letters lingered like a stain under my skin. I collapsed on the porch steps, staring into the dark street. Then I saw it. Movement near the oak tree at the end of the block. A figure stood there, still as stone. I pulled my phone up, zoomed the camera, but the face was hidden by shadow. Just as I thought they would vanish, the figure lifted a hand slowly and mimed turning a key in a lock. My lock. The message was unmistakable. They were telling me they had access. But how? The only key that existed. I froze. My blood turned to ice. The key tag I'd found in the mailbox wasn't a warning. It was proof. Proof that someone in the HOA had a copy of my key. Which meant my house was no longer mine alone. I barely slept. Every creak of the house sounded like a footstep. I kept telling myself I was being paranoid. Until I walked into the kitchen and found my favorite mug in the sink, water still beading on the rim. I don't leave the sink like that. I always rinse and stack. Someone had used my dishes. My chest tightened. I moved through the house like a woman checking for traps. The cushions on the couch sat in odd angles. A book I had left open on the coffee table was closed and flipped the other way. The photograph of my mother on the mantel. Her face, the one I kept turned to the wall when I read late at night, was facing forward, eyes catching the light. Little things, but wrong in a way that said another person had decided how my home should stand when I returned. On the kitchen counter beside the bread box, there was a single white glove folded neatly. Not mine, not anyone's who'd been to my house before. I picked it up and smelled it. Not a smell of the outdoors, but something floral and faint, like cheap perfume someone might wear to cover themselves when they knew they'd been out in the dark. My bedroom doorway brought me to a new kind of hush. I paused in the hall and noticed the rug that usually lies flat had a slight ridge, as if something heavy had been dragged across it. I knelt and ran my fingers along the seam. There were small scuff marks, barely visible, and a smear of dirt that did not belong to my slippers or to the garden shoes I keep by the door. Someone had walked across my floor with purpose. I pulled open the dresser. My jewelry box, a wooden one with a latch my husband had given me years ago, was slightly ajar. Inside, a string of small pearls I always wear to Sunday service was missing. Not expensive, but mine. A token of who I was. The emptiness in that velvet cushion felt like a person had taken from me not only an object, but a piece of myself. My phone lit up with new motion alerts. I almost dropped it. The camera I tucked beneath the eave on the back porch had detected movement inside the house. Inside, my heartbeat stomped against my ribs. The feed was grainy but live. A shadow moved past the kitchen doorway, the silhouette broad at the shoulders, hood up. They were inside my home. For a second, my brain refused to accept the scene. Then the feed clicked. The camera had caught them lifting something from the mantel. My mother's locket. My breath came in shallow bursts. Someone had come in. Someone had walked through rooms where I sleep, touch, pray. Someone who knew where to find the things that mattered to me. I called Rosa. Her voice was immediate, sharp. "Get out of there! Now! I'll be at your door in 10 minutes." 10 minutes felt like a lifetime. I grabbed my keys with hands that would not stop shaking. I took the folder of evidence, the photos, the notes. Anything I could not live without if this was the last time I stepped over my threshold. I threw on a cardigan, left the house unlocked behind me. An act that felt like betrayal and trust all at once, and headed down the block. As I reached the corner, I looked back. The porch light was on. From my neighbor's stoop, shadows pooled like ink. Someone watched, but I could not tell whether they were looking at me or at something beyond. My phone buzzed. Another motion alert. I fumbled it open with trembling fingers. The live feed now showed the silhouette in my bedroom. For a moment, the figure turned just enough for the camera to catch the profile. An ordinary jaw, the slope of a nose. But then the figure moved closer to the bed and stopped. And then they did something I did not expect. They reached out and smoothed the blanket over the sleeping side of the bed, as if tucking in a child. Their hand paused, hovering over the pillow, and then, with a slow, deliberate motion, they placed something there. My thumb hovered over the screen, but I couldn't bring myself to zoom. Rosa called. "Evacuate! Don't go back until the police are here." Her voice broke on the last word. I kept watching. The figure backed away and turned toward the camera. For an impossible second, I thought I saw the shape of Mrs. Dalton's stooped shoulders. Then the figure lifted a hand, and the camera picked out a glint, a small pale object. My stomach dropped when I recognized it. The missing pearl from my mother's locket, clipped to a thin safety pin, pinned to a folded scrap of paper. On the paper in handwriting I knew too well, because I had seen it on my porch and in my mailbox. 2 words were scrawled, slow and deliberate. "Go home." My phone slipped from my fingers and clattered on the pavement. Rosa was already at my side, breathless, her eyes wild with the same fear that had always lived for a while in the back of my chest, but had never been invited into the open. She touched my arm. "We get the police now," she whispered. I nodded, but before I could move, another notification lit my screen. A new message had been sent from an unknown number to my phone. It read, "You moved in here. We gave you welcome. You didn't leave. Now it's our turn to finish it." The camera feed froze. Then, as if someone on the inside had decided the show was over, The live image went black. I looked up at my house across the street, its windows dark and unreadable. The night felt closer than a skin. My mouth tasted of metal. Who had turned my life into a performance? Who had taken what belonged to me and left a threat like a signature? And most dangerous of all, how many of my neighbors were actors in it? The cruiser's red and blue lights painted the street like a bad celebration. When Officer Ramirez stepped out, he moved differently from the first man. The kind of careful, practical gait that made you think he actually listened. Rosa stayed close to me, hand on my elbow, as I walked him through the folder. Photos, notes, the key tag, the motion clips saved to my thumb drive. He watched the footage without flinching. When the hooded figure pointed at the camera, his jaw tightened. When the camera showed the intruder smoothing my blanket, his eyes narrowed until they were almost tired sad. "This is escalation," he said at last. "We'll file charges for trespassing and vandalism. I can assign patrols for the block." Relief folded through me like sunlight. For the first time in weeks, I let myself breathe. Will you put someone on watch?" I asked. "We'll increase patrols for now," he said. "And I'll have an officer at the neighborhood meeting tomorrow." He paused, looking toward the houses across the street. "We'll also see about who had HOA pins issued and cross-check." I nodded, clutching the folder hard. It felt less lonely with an officer's promise pinned to it. Rosa squeezed my hand. "We'll make noise," she said. "We'll call the local paper, the council. This community won't push you out under our watch." That night, for the first time in days, I slept with the porch light on and the camera recording. I woke heavy but guarded by a small, deliberate hope. I made coffee, sat with the footage again, and tried to catalog anyone I recognized. Faces blurred into a neighborhood I hadn't known I'd been living in. A place of smiles that could flip like coins. At 10 in the morning, my phone buzzed with a message from Officer Ramirez. "We traced one HOA pin registration to E. Harris. She's on the list. I can request statements." I felt a small, vicious triumph, confirmation that my instincts were not wrong. I texted back, "Thank you," fingers trembling. Then another message came from an unknown number. "Stop making a scene. Some things are easier if you move quietly." The words rolled like a warning. My eyes filled again. Not with the same cold fear this time, but with something like resolution that tastes faintly of iron. By evening, the neighborhood was a boiling pot. Mr. Carlyle called for the HOA meeting to proceed as scheduled. Flyers for the meeting were taped to lampposts with the note, "Community Decision." I thought of the way that phrase had been used before. Decision as a polite euphemism for exclusion. The police said they'd have an officer present. Rosa and Yvonne promised to come. I told myself the room would not be a jury. It would be a place where truth could be told. Before I left, I checked my email and found a new file in my inbox. Voice note. Grozordo Dardarami 3. No sender. No subject line. Just my name in the header. My stomach dropped. I almost deleted it, thinking it a threat or a prank. Instead, because evidence was my armor now, I opened it. The file began with the low murmur of a crowded room, chairs scraping, cups clinking. Then a voice I recognized with a punch so hard it made my ears ring. Mr. Carlyle's clear, composed tone. "We need to make sure the community maintains standards," he said. "Start with small pressure, flyers, notes, a visible rule enforcement. Let her feel unwelcome without bringing in outside sympathy." A softer voice answered. My blood ran cold when I realized who it was. Eileen Harris. "And if she resists, Mr. Carlyle, we escalate. Someone will deliver messages directly. We must be precise. No threats that can be traced back to us. Keep it personal." Eileen. "Understood." The recording ended abruptly. Just the scrape of a chair, and then silence. My hands trembled so badly, I had to set the phone on the table. Officer Ramirez's text flashed again. "We can subpoena meeting recordings if needed." But the damage of the audio was immediate, raw. It named names, exposed intent, the sanitized conspiracy behind polite smiles and casserole dishes. I sat very still. For months I had wondered if the neighborhood's coldness was 1,000 tiny accidents stacked together. Now it was a plan, a deliberate effort to drive me away. I picked up my coat and the folder, feeling a tightness in my jaw I'd never known could belong to me. At the door I paused, fingers on the knob, and thought of Mrs. Dalton, of how she had whispered that it was who I am that drove them. I thought of the pin in my pocket, of tabletop evidence, of the camera feed. If the HOA had coordinated this, then the battle was not simply for one house. It was about the very definition of belonging here. I walked to the community hall with the audio file playing quietly through my phone speakers as I crossed the green. A few neighbors clustered near the door, faces bland and expectant. Mr. Carlyle greeted me with that same practiced smile, like a man who'd already decided the script's outcome. Inside, before anyone could call the meeting to order, I stepped up to the podium and spoke into the microphone with a voice that surprised me with its steadiness. "I have evidence," I said. "I have photos, notes, video, and an audio file of HOA members discussing plans to push me out. I'm laying it all on the table." Murmurs rippled. Mr. Carlyle's smile faltered. Eileen's chin lifted as if she hadn't expected to be called by name. Before I could continue, the lights flickered once, briefly, and then went out. The room plunged into darkness. The hush that followed was not simple silence. It was a held breath, waiting for what would come next. And in that dark, my phone vibrated. A text lit up the screen with a single line. "You shouldn't have brought that file. Who had sent the message? And how did they know I had played the recording?" Gasps and nervous laughter broke the silence in the meeting hall, the kind of sound people make when they want to pretend they aren't afraid. I gripped my phone so tightly my knuckles ached. The glow from the screen was the only light in the room, and every face I could see leaned toward it, hungry for information, wary of truth. The message burned at me. "You shouldn't have brought that file." I scanned the crowd, trying to read expressions in the dim glow of emergency exit lights. Carlyle stood rigid near the podium, arms crossed, jaw set. Eileen Harris adjusted her cardigan, her lips pressed in a line that looked more annoyed than surprised. And then my eyes fell on Mrs. Dalton, seated 2 rows back, cane propped against her knees. She wasn't looking at me. She was staring straight at my phone, unblinking, as if she already knew what was written there. A click, then a hum. The lights returned with a harsh glare. Carlyle cleared his throat. "It seems we've had a technical issue. Shall we resume?" "No," I said, louder than I expected. My voice bounced off the walls, off the polished tile floor. "Not until I play this." I pressed the audio file, let the recording spill into the speakers. Carlyle's smooth tones, Eileen's hesitant question, the plan spelled out in words that could not be denied. The murmurs in the room rose to shouts. Some neighbors shook their heads in disbelief. Others glared at me with open resentment, not because they doubted, but because the curtain had been ripped away. Carlyle slammed his hand on the podium. "This is an invasion of privacy. It's conspiracy." I cut in. "It's harassment, and it's illegal." Before he could answer, Officer Ramirez stepped forward from the back of the room, badge visible on his chest. His voice carried authority that silenced even the loudest heckle. "We'll be taking this as evidence. No one leaves this building until statements are given." The room fractured. Half relief, half outrage. I caught Eileen's gaze. Her face had drained of color, her hands shaking despite her effort to hold them still. But then something happened that twisted the floor beneath me. Mrs. Dalton struggled to her feet, leaning hard on her cane. "This has gone far enough," she said, her voice brittle but sharp. "Don't you see? She doesn't belong here, not because of her garden or her music or her age, because she makes this place weak, and weakness invites danger." The words sank like knives. For weeks I had thought she was the one neighbor with a shred of compassion. Now I saw her clearly. Not a frail grandmother, but a willing accomplice. Someone who cloaked cruelty in the language of order. Ramirez stepped toward her, but Carlyle barked, "Sit down, Ethel." The slip, her first name, sharp and exposed, rattled the room. Dalton's mouth clamped shut, but her eyes flicked toward Carlyle in something close to fear. It struck me then. Dalton wasn't the leader. She was a follower, a pawn. The true conductor of this orchestra of silence and intimidation was still Carlyle, the man who stood tall at the podium, as though the entire block were his stage. And yet, someone else had texted me in the dark. Someone who knew the exact moment the file would play. If it wasn't Carlyle, and it wasn't Dalton, then who else in this room was pulling strings? I slipped the phone into my pocket, pulse racing. Ramirez's presence gave me a thin shield,